Delighted to be here and delighted to have the chance to do this. So we're going to be looking at these first few hours, an absolutely critical few hours after the calf is born. Nothing particularly new that I'm going to have to say, but we've been doing a tremendous lot of work with calves and heifers, mainly dairy, but quite a lot of beef stuff as well, and I'm going to be sharing some of that with you. So what we're going to talk about is, first of all, how to make sure you can give your calves a good start. Colostrum, really, we would have the view that more or less anything that goes wrong with calves, and even if it's when they're 2, 3, 4 months old, you need to look back at that colostrum and see whether the right amount and they are really being properly protected. We'll look at hygiene, we'll look at the effective quality of stockmanship, and then just have a very brief look at the various targets and the things that you can be looking at on monitoring on your own farm to see whether things are going well enough. So if we start now, this is a calf who hasn't had a wonderful start, and I use the photo all the time taken by Chris Price. First thing, of course, if you possibly can, is to have an accurate predicted calving date, which of course in beef herds or in any herd where they're running with the bull can be tricky, but that does make a difference, and early pregnancy diagnosis will also help that, so that you get a good clue as to when the cows are due to calve, and so you can have them prepared properly. The second thing is observation of the calving cow, and there's a number of aspects to this. Of course, in an ideal world, the calving cow is the calving cows are somewhere where people are going to observe them several times a day, and if you've got a calving yard, then that's ideally situated in a dairy herd near to the parlour, so that somebody's going to be going past and going to notice those changes that happen all the time. There are also aids to observation of the cow, of the calving cow, and I do go to places where they've put up CCTV cameras, which are now extremely cheap. But you can also get these intravaginal devices, which are pushed out as the water bag pushes into the vagina, and then and that will then alert the herdsman and the farmer that the cow is calving. So that can be also a useful thing, because clearly the quicker that you get to the cow if something's going wrong, the more likely you are to be able to solve it and put things right. And the third thing is ease of calving. Now, of course, a large beef, a continental type beef calf is worth more than a little tiny Hereford or something like that. But a dead one is not worth anything at all. And ease of calving, especially for heifers, and especially if it's not possible to have very close observations, for example overnight, becomes a very important trait. The calf that has to be pulled, a beef calf that has to be pulled, is 30 times more likely to die than a calf that is born under its own steam. This is 2 bits of work showing percentage of calves that were born dead, and the blue columns were data collected by a student, Rosie Waters, 3 years ago, and she looked at these herds, and these were the percentages born dead, and actually probably lower than in several other studies. So a study a few years ago found that on 19 dairy herds found that around about 8% were born dead. We've got some very low figures there, and we've also, but the highest there was just below 12%. What's interesting though was when Rosie was doing this study, that a lot of farms that data simply was not available. I've been collecting mortality data and others in the practice to find out more about it, and The red ones, the 2015 ones, that's not to suggest that things are getting worse, but I just have put those in because they are example herds with a high number of calves being born dead, and in none of those herds, and two of those are 16% of the calves born dead. The farmer didn't ask us out to say we've got too many calves being born dead. So I think quite often this figure is much higher than you realise, and of course if it is high like this, in one of those two very high herds, once we thought about it, it was quite obvious. In the other, we're still investigating why too many calves are being born dead. But an awful lot of those are difficult calvings on the whole. The next thing to look at is calf vigour once it's born, and this, of course, will be tremendously influenced if the calf is exhausted at the end of the calving process, and it will tend to get a lot of acid in the bloodstream. It will tend to be more sluggish. But there are other reasons why calves are sluggish at birth, and I'm not suggesting that you should that you should be timing this for every calf that's born, but on average, calves should start to take an interest in life and get themselves up and start getting up to stand very, very quickly. I did a heifer training day one time, not in our practice, down in Colostrum, and the herd where we did it, the farmer had a story of how he had bought a whole lot of extremely cheap trace element boluses one time, and he gave them to his pre-calved heifers and his dry cows, and he said he'd never realised until then that his calves were routinely rather sluggish and dopey when they're born, and they were much more vigorous after that. And there are various, a number of reasons why that might be happening. So just worth looking at that and checking whether your calves are hitting those targets. The next thing, colostrum, and I'm not going to apologise for the fact that I'm sure you've heard this story before, but it is a very, very important one. And despite the fact that there's a lot of information everywhere about making sure calves get enough colostrum, most surveys find that somewhere round about somewhere between a quarter and a third of calves don't receive enough colostral protection. We can check that by taking blood samples. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the first thing is that the calf has got to have enough, and we're talking there very simple. So a 40 kilo, that's a sort of average Holstein type of calf, is going to need 4 litres of colostrum within the first 6 hours. Now some would say give them 2 feeds of 2 litres in that 6 hours. We have got some herds where they're whacking them with 4 litres in one hit, and then you know that the calf has had it. And I think one of the things to be certain about, I felt I couldn't use the time now to do this, but is to get familiar with stomach tubing calves. If you're not doing it as at the moment, just there is an extremely good link through AHDB Dairy, and you can with a little bit of a video to show you exactly how to do it. Once you get familiar with it, you won't be nervous about it, and then if you're in any doubt, make sure that you tube the calf if you need to. I put in 4 cues here. AHDB only has 3. We'll talk about that in a sec. The second thing is quality, and cow factors are very important, and particularly the beef dies on the whole are relatively safe here, and colostrum quality is going to be very good, except in the situation of beef cows at the end of a winter where forage quality has been poor, and if they've lost a lot of condition, you will occasionally get problems with beef cattle where colostrum quality isn't good enough. But in the high-yielding dairy herd, colostrum quality is a terrific issue, and very often well under half the cows are producing quality that is not good, colostrum that is really simply not good enough quality. The second thing is, and we tend to think that heifers produce poorer quality colostrum than cows, but actually, with that dilution effect, it can be that heifer colostrum is actually fuller of antibodies than cow colostrum. The second thing is hygiene, and colostrum, as it's milked from the cow, is practically sterile, and quality is good. Now, if it is left standing, and particularly if it gets warm and it's been taken in not very hygienic conditions, the bacteria will will destroy a lot of those antibodies that are in the colostrum, and so colostrum that was good quality as it came out of the cow will deteriorate. And the third thing is that the timing of first milking after calving. So the cow that is milked immediately after she calves, or of course if her calf springs to his feet within half an hour or so and is sucking very, very quickly, her colostrum quality is better than if it's quite a few hours after calving before she first goes through the parlour. And there's always a trade-off for in the dairy herd. We don't particularly want a cow that only calved 5 minutes ago to be walking out on concrete and going through a parlour. We have to think about how we're going to achieve that. The colostrometer is an easy way of checking colostrum quality. So it's simply measuring specific gravity, and the higher the colostrometer rides in the colostrum, the denser it is, the higher the specific gravity, and that variation is due to differences in colostral antibody content. Unfortunately, with this, with a colostrometer, which is a cheap and cheerful technique, the colostrum needs to be cooled off, needs to be sort of 18-20 degrees. We can use a specific gravity, a refractometer, which we can do with just a drop of colostrum at any temperature. So here, colostrum quality, clearly that colostrum, even if it was good when it came out of the cow, is not going to be any good when it goes into the calf. And not only will the antibodies have been destroyed, but also that is a soup of bacteria, and we just simply don't want to be putting that into our baby calves. So this is an example from another herd. So super duper nice clean colostrum stored there and ready to go, and with the dates on, so you know how recently it was milked out of the cow. And also needs to be very quickly fed after the calf is born. Once the calf is 24 hours old, there's really no uptake of antibodies from the gut. But even but that 6 hours is a crucial time, because that's when the crossing of antibodies into the calf's bloodstream from the gut starts to reduce rather quickly. So we want to do this as quickly as we possibly can after the calf is born. This is on one of our herds, and we've got 2 or 3 herds where they're doing this. They've got a mobile cluster, not fantastically expensive to buy. So this is a way of getting the colostrum out of the cow as soon as she calves. So we haven't got to wait. We haven't got to take her out across the concrete into the parlour, and we can give the calf his colostrum within an hour or half an hour after he's born. I've added quietly because I think this is more of an issue really in the beef herd, but can also be a problem in dairy herds. Anywhere where there's a calving yard that is a bit crowded, and what will tend to happen is that other cows will come in and come on after after the calf. These are our own cattle, and none of those others is actually due to calves. But if they were not separated, all of those will be taking interest in that baby calf, and then he forgets who his mum is, or doesn't work out who his mum is. So the calving cow needs plenty of space. Easy enough when they're out in a field, but if they're in a yard, we're talking about 12 to 16 square meters per cow, and the more the merrier. And again, with increasing herd sizes, and sometimes with a change from all year round calving to block calving, calving yards get overcrowded. There are other problems associated with that other than just the colostrum problem. But certainly it's worthwhile measuring your yards and checking whether there are too many cows calving there. Hygiene. First of all, so this is the calf's first exposure to bugs, and they're very, very susceptible. The navel is open, they haven't had their colostrum protection, and so and we need to get that protection in as quickly as we can. Straw is expensive, but it's not nearly as expensive as dead animals, and keeping the calving yard clean and well bedded is really, really important. I've already said that it's important that the colostrum should be clean, and the stomach tube itself should also be clean. So there certainly should be, if you're using stomach tube to feed colostrum to calves, make sure that you've got two. So you need one which is used for the sick calf, and one which is used for the baby calf as soon as it's born, and they need to be, both need to be thoroughly cleaned between uses, because again, otherwise there's a danger that just a soup of bacteria and bugs are going down into the calf when it's born. And of course, very often the calf moves on to a calf pen within a few hours of birth, and that too needs to be clean. My experience is that this is easier in the block calving herd than in the all year round calving herd, where very often calf pens are in use 365 days a year, and it is really quite impossible to have an all-in, all-out policy. But if you're getting disease in young calves, almost always there is something that you can do to break that cycle. Some of the bugs that calves are susceptible to when they're very young are very, very difficult to kill, and so that unless you can completely clear out the pen, pressure hose it down, disinfect and leave it to dry, you're not going to improve the hygiene enough, and the baby calf comes in and gets more bugs. So those are the general factors. But I think there are also, it's important to know the disease profile in your own herd. Yoni is increasingly important to us on the dairy side, and most herds now, most of the dairies are insisting that we know what the yoni status of the cows is. And of course, herds that are testing positive should calve separately, and ideally you snatch the calf. This particular calf, this is a setup where the cow calves onto sand, and the calf is snatched away as soon as it's born because they've had a serious problem with mycoplasmas. There was clinical problems in the cows, but then that moved into the calves, and this is very often where the calf picks up its mycoplasma. So even though they don't show disease necessarily for quite a few days, it may well pick up the mycoplasma soon after it's born. And salmonella, another one where shedding tends to happen around calving time. I mean, I could make a list a mile long, but those are three to be going on with. And if you know what the disease status is in your own herd, then you can take specific action to protect your calves from disease. Of course, you can be protecting your adults at the same time. And if you're going to be doing a snatch calving system, you're definitely going to need a store of colostrum. This is an easy way of doing it. That there are more sophisticated systems for storing colostrum, and we do have some herds in the practice now who are routinely pasteurizing all their colostrum because it'll reduce the risk of Johne's, and it'll more or less completely effectively get rid of mycoplasma problems. Expensive, an expensive outlay, but on the other hand, if we're talking dairy heifers, they're very, very valuable, and if you can prevent disease and death, then that is really money well spent. Quality of stockmanship is absolutely crucial, and we see whenever I'm talking about calves, I always say there's no perfect system for rearing calves, and you see the same system working wonderfully well in one herd and disastrously badly in another, and that is all down to the people who are doing the work. And I may be in this, but a lot of herds now are recognising this and getting somebody in who is the dedicated calf person who's looking after these baby calves can make a huge difference to not only mortality but also to the incidence of problems like calf scour and navel ill and joint ill and all these kinds of things. And it is that attention to detail is the first thing. So take and these I think are in the wrong order. Time as well. There has to be time made available for the stock person to provide that attention to detail. So to make sure that in each calf gets a really good start. And of course, technical knowledge is important, and that's going to be not only from college and all that sort of stuff, but from years of experience. And the person who looks after the calf has to be motivated. Another thing that sometimes goes wrong in dairy herds is that the adult cow person, the adult herdsman, is the one who gives the calves the colostrum, and then the calves move away to a calf unit where somebody else looks after them. Herdsmen tend to be tremendously busy. Their time is tremendously much taken up, and since they don't then see the calves again, may not always be quite so motivated to get the colostrum into them. So these are things to think about with making sure things work as well as they possibly can. So I'm not going to attempt to give you exact targets for any particular farm, but these are the kinds of things that I think you should be monitoring to see whether. I've said that this fairly large survey a few years ago found that average dead was about 8%. In our practice, we found it to be a bit less than that, and when we've been looking for it, but you know, as I said earlier, there is a huge variation, and we should be looking, you know, in an ideal world, we should be looking at less than 5% of calves being born dead. If it's a lot more than that, it may well be that you can look back and you can say, oh well, they were all twins, or it was all difficult calving, or huge great calves, whatever it is. In which case you may need to think about changing your bull, or it may be that that it's quite impossible for somebody to observe overnight. So you've got to think of some other way of making sure there is an alert if a cow is calving, so that the difficult calving gets dealt with quickly. Or it may be, and not particularly commonly, but it may be that you've got a trace element problem or something else going wrong, which is meaning that these calves are not being born alive. The second thing to look at is calf mortality, and of course the colostrum only lasts for 6 to 8 weeks after the calf is born, but but really it's useful to look at mortality all the way through the calf's life, and look at the causes for that, because respiratory disease, even if it's occurring at 3, 4, 5 months old, you can track it back, and if you can sort out colostrum intakes, it may well be that respiratory disease and pneumonia can be tackled. Again, you know, we want to be looking at low calf mortality. Calves are worth a lot of money, and a lot of money goes into getting them on the ground. And in some herds, this is being routinely monitored. In others, the only way to find it out is by going through the diary and working out what was born dead and what dies. And it's a worthwhile thing. And if it's too many, then you can tackle it. The percentage of calves that don't get enough colostrum, you can work this out by taking blood samples, or your vet taking blood samples when calves are 1 to 7 days old, and checking. There's a number of different tests that can be done to check whether the calves have had enough colostrum. And if you take samples from 10 calves, we should be getting 8 or 9 of them should have had plenty of colostrum. So on average, we want 85% plus should be getting plenty of colostrum if you take those blood samples. And if that isn't happening, we'll need to look at the reason why it's not happening and investigate what's been going wrong. And I think it's useful. Some herds are blood sampling every calf to monitor this. But it may not be necessary to do that, but it's certainly worth updating that once every 3 months, once a month. You take a few bloods from a few calves and check where you are. And if the percentage of calves that are getting enough colostrum is falling, then you need to look at why that's happening. And also, the fourth thing is to monitor incidence of disease in your young calves. And particularly those, you know, it's that diarrhea in the baby calves and joint ills, navel ills that may be causing, that may be indicating that one of these things that we've been talking about may not be quite right. I've realised I've completely forgotten to say anything about navel dressing for calves, which certainly, if they're housed to calves, very, very useful. We would advise a tincture of iodine, so not a teat dip type of thing, which has an emollient in it, because that will stop the navel from drying. But also navel clips can be used, and some people do use antibiotic sprays, but probably we shouldn't be doing that. So all it remains for me to do now is to say that there are also, see whether you're achieving targets. There is a lot of extremely useful information on the AHDB websites, and certainly that tube feeding colostrum. If you're not doing that and you're not familiar with doing that, it's worth having a look at that. So all of these kind of things are here and very useful, very user-friendly. And this is a new set of meetings that are about to start, calf to calving. So taking the calves through, and it's really going through all the way from the. And we've been talking now about those first few hours, but taking them right through until they calve into the adult herd. And I think this is an extremely exciting program that's going ahead. So those are both dairy, and we've also got beef and lamb information. So a lot of extremely useful stuff there.